As part of my series of reviews of old games, games that may not always be the best games around, but that are somehow important or interesting in terms of board game history, today I'm going to tell a bit about Dark World. Dark World, it is a famous game, well-known game, known as one of the most overproduced games of all times. Usually, in discussions about the topic, only topped by Legend of Zagor, usually considered the most overproduced games of all times. By the way, as a side, I am trying to locate a copy of Legend of Zagor to add to my collection, or at least to try, at least to play. So if you know somebody who has one, or you have one that I could acquire without having to get a second or third mortgage on the house, then that would be great. Just let me know. And then, if I can find a copy, I will also feature it in one of my videos. But today we talk about silver medal for overproduction, Dark World. The Dark World is a fantasy game, dungeon crawler type of thing from 1992. A time where board games are going through a crisis of identity. They are threatened by video games, and maybe because of that, they are trying to emphasize the material aspect, the material quality, which is what sets them apart. Video games cannot do that. So we have a game that is full of components, nice looking, really powerful, three-dimensional things. Sensorially speaking, this is a great game. It looks good, it has 3D elements, it has miniatures and elements that are fun to manipulate, but there is a huge gap between the material components and which are so baroque, so excessive, and at the same time the simplicity, straightforwardness, and really extreme, excessive linearity of the mechanics and what the game has to offer. An example, the game has little treasure chests which look amazing. Look at them. They are plastic treasure chests with lids that open, and in each of these treasure chests at the beginning of the game you place one of these weapons, which are golden weapons, and that are meant to replace the standard weapons that the heroes wear or carry at the beginning of the game. So when you find one of those treasure chests, you open it and you replace the weapon with the better one. Da-da-da-da! Come on, it looks really great. But what does that do? All it does is simply to give you an extra combat die. So instead of rolling these two boring dice that I will mention about, you get a third one when you're using one of those magic weapons. By the way, every treasure chest has exactly the same thing, one of those magic weapons, and they all work the same. They look different, but they all simply give you an extra die. So it's an extremely simple, linear, bland game mechanic or bonus that is quantifiable in terms of game mechanics. But it could have been solved simply by having a counter that has a treasure chest on one side and a weapon on the other side. Heck, since all the chests are exactly the same, they contain the same thing, there's no difference. You don't even need the back with that is printed with a chest. You simply need a counter representing a weapon. You stop on you stamp on that area, you pick it, you place it by your play area, and you're done. But no, everything has to be exquisitely overdone in this game. The game is about a party of 4 heroes that you see down there, the light brown people, that are entering this area, sort of like castle that works like a dungeon. They enter from the tile that you see there, and they move on the dungeon space after space. Movement is only orthogonal, never diagonal. They open doors, which, by the way, once open, they have no game effect, and they stay open for the rest of the game, which means could have been a bit unnecessary. A token placed there to indicate there's a door. Once you move it, it means that the adjacent rooms have been explored. They move, so from area to area. Oh, I have to show you this. There are also secret passages, which, again, let's face it, that's pretty adorable. You have a mirror on one side, you have the shelf on the other side. Amazing and unnecessary. So we have this party of 4 heroes that are traveling in this area here. They will face monsters every time that they enter a new area. The player that controls the monsters may add new monsters from a pool of several available ones. Here is an example of some of the main ones. And then, of course, there are multiple copies that I placed back there. So every time the heroes discover a new area, the monster player will add new monsters. There's a limit depending on the area in which they are. Early rooms only allow a certain number of hit points represented by monsters to be in there. Later rooms have monsters that are tougher. Monsters have a number printed at the bottom that indicates the number of hit points that they have. As you can see, it may differ. When you have multiple monsters of the same type, they may have different numbers of hit points. So there's a total number of hit points that the monster player, the evil player, can place in each room. So the monster player can choose to trick the opponents, to trick the heroes. They don't know exactly which of those guys is stronger, which one is weaker. So how does it work? Again, we need at least 2 players, and one of the players will be the evil guy. The evil guy incidentally also has a miniature representing him, and it is that evil guy there, sort of like snake character, snake monster, snake man type of creature. And then we have the heroes. The heroes can be played by a variable number of players. So depending on the number of players, they'll divide up the available heroes. So you have 2 players, one is the bad guy, one controls 4 heroes, 3 players, so then 2 heroes for each of the good guys. Now, what happens? Each turn, at the beginning of the turn, you will decide the order in which the heroes activate, and to do that, you use one of the strangest game components that I've ever seen. It is this sort of like gray skull sword thing that you shake, and then you put standing on one element of the board that is there to hold it, and then you will resolve the activation of the heroes in order here from green to yellow to blue to red in this case. And each hero is labeled with a different color, and the label of the color is on the little plastic thing that you use to keep the cards that you have, and then you have a little tray there where you put the monster that you slay, so you have a record of the number of hit points. Yes, each hero is a tray. The only thing that is really necessary is the color dot to match with the activation color. That's all you need. All the rest of the fact is a full tray is completely unnecessary. But that's what overproduction is all about, isn't it? So back to us. You usually, the evil player, uses this strange game element here, which, as a small digression, reminds me of this guy from the game Incognito, who also has a similar function and works in a similar way. So you determine the order in which the players activate, the heroes activates, and then each hero that activates in the correct order, and the heroes are all the same, doesn't matter if they look different, it doesn't matter if the rulebook tells you the ranger is really sneaky, the barbarian is poor strength, they all work exactly the same. So each hero gets to activate, and during his activation each hero gets 3 actions. An action can be used to move a single space, and again, as I said earlier, movement is only orthogonal, or to attack if the hero is adjacent to a monster. And unless you're using a special weapon, then combat is only adjacent, is only melee combat. So you can spend an action to perform an attack. To perform an attack, you roll 2 dice, unless you have the golden weapon, one of the golden weapons, then you roll 3. You look at the number of swords that you rolled, in this case is 3. Then, if it's multiple hero players, and if you have multiple players controlling the heroes, the players don't like each other very much. They may be helping each other, but it's still a competitive game. There will only be one winner, which will be either the evil player or one of the heroes. So if you have multiple players, the hero performs an attack, then looks secretly at the base to see if the number of hit points was matched, met, or exceeded by the swords. Because if that is not the case, then the player says, oh shoot, I don't have enough, and puts the monster back in there. In this case, I have enough, so I simply kill that monster. Monsters don't have hit points. It's like either they're completely alive, healthy, and functional, or they die in a single hit. In case I kind of almost killed the monster, but not quite, and I want to give my attack an extra boost, I have cards that I can use here. Each hit card that I play counts an extra hit. There are also some other cards that I use to dodge the attacks of the enemies. They work in the same way. When the opponent is attacking me, the opponent rolls damage against me using those dice, and I can reduce the number of swords rolled against me, this number of hits, by playing a card. So, attack or combat is an attack launched by the hero, and if the monster is still alive at the end, the monster gets to attack. All monsters, no matter how big and terrifying they are, attack in the same way. They always roll 2 dice, and they inflict a number of hits on you, equal to the number of swords, as possibly modified by these dodge cards. When you take hits, you record the number of hits as a hero here with on the base of the character by rotating the base. This hero click sort of things, and I don't know, was it? This game is from 1992. Did we have the hero clicks thing already in 1992, or is this an early example of that idea? And of course, if you go down to 0, you're killed. Now there are also magic items that you may acquire. One is a magic potion that allows you to heal. Another one is like magic boost and make you go faster. There's also a grenade, which is not very useful, not very effective. But as you can see, you have different miniatures. They look great and they all work the same. The only difference among the monsters really is that some are tougher to kill and some easier to kill, but they're all equally lethal. The heroes look different, but they all play the same. So you have again this complete gap between the variety in the components and the sameness in the mechanics. So the heroes activate one after the other in the correct order, and they perform 3 actions. Then the bad guy gets to act. The bad guy gets to act with all of the monsters that are already visible, that are already on the board. Remember, they become visible only when the heroes discover a new area. So the monster character gets to activate any visible monster. The monsters move, get to attack, and resolution of combat is exactly as for the heroes, but in this case the monsters attack first and then the surviving heroes get to counter attack. There's also a special character, sort of like a ghost type of character. Oh, there it is. Is that guy there in the back? You see that guy that looks like the murderer in the movie Scream? It is a very weird character that the evil player can use but not completely control. Because when you activate the character, you roll a d10 and that randomly determines the row of squares in which that character moves and attacks all of the monsters and heroes in that line. Suppose that I rolled a 3, 1, 2, and 3. Oopsie. I rolled a 3, 1, 2, and 3. Then everybody in that row there gets attacked. Which essentially means that that nice little miniature that I just show you never really goes on the board unless you want to play with it, pretty much. And then you go like... And then you go like... Whee! But this is really what that guy's for, because at the end of the attack, the guy leaves the board. So that guy really... You don't even need that piece, but you have it. Couple of other rules. For example, when you reach the second area, that is when you pass that gate there is a fountain that allows you to heal. Then you move in the final area when you're trying to reach the bad evil guy. The bad evil guy is super nasty, super annoying. You pretty much get a single hit against him. because if you don't kill him with a single hit, and by the way, you need to accumulate some of these cards to be able to kill him, because simply mathematically you will not be able to produce sufficient hit symbols with the dice. Why did I say that you get a chance at hitting me and not hitting him and not multiple one? Simply because if he's still alive, he gets to attack you with 3 dice, and so a simple lucky hit may kill you. Incidentally, just earlier in the game, it may just so happen that the monsters do get lucky, and a couple of attacks, like 2 attacks, 2 lucky attacks from the monsters, they give you maybe 4 hits each. So a couple of bad rolls, a couple doesn't mean 4 or 5, it means like 2 bad rolls are enough to kill the best of heroes. You try to kill him, and may not be the case. If he kills you, then you're out of the game, dark player elimination, and you simply sit there and wait for the game to be over. If you kill him, the game is over immediately, and at that point you count points. The heroes count points that are based on number and type of monsters that they kill, the treasure that they acquired, but pretty much the player that kills the monster will get extra points, extra bonuses. So in most cases, the player that kills the big bad guy is the winner of the game, which again really means that you play for a long time, and at the end it all goes down to a single lucky roll. You're lucky when you're fighting against him, you win the game. You're unlucky, somebody else wins the game. It's that disappointing. The bad guy wins if all of the heroes are slain, and this is in essence how Dark World works. So, Dark World, presentation-wise, components-wise, anywhere between A+ and B minus, depending on what you're looking for from your components. Design-wise, C minus, just because I feel generous and in a good mood today. The components, A+ as toys, because they look very good. They look very good as landscape. And in fact, one of the best things you can do with this game pretty much is to forget about the game and to use the toys that you find in here as terrain for miniature games. Then, well, you go through those doors and you climb those steps and you walk through the secret passage. That's fun stuff, but you need to provide your own miniatures for fantasy confrontations, and it can be fun that way. You know, just add rules and you have a game. This game gives you the terrain. Even as game components, these elements are not all that great, and hence the B minus grade, because there's just a lot of work that you have to do for functions that could be better performed by components that were much more linear. So you are spending time sorting through all of the components and placing those weapons that are all the same in those coffins that are all the same, and it's just time that you spend, energy that you spend. In a certain sense, actually, the luxuriant nature of the components, the incredibly elaborate nature of the components sorely emphasizes the painfully straightforward, linear, predictable, tasteless nature of the mechanics, which are just move and roll, move and roll, move and roll. A dungeon crawler that disappointed me that I played, I believe, last year was Dungeon Venture. Dark World pretty much has the same complexity. Dungeon Venture doesn't even have the beauty of the elements. Dungeon Venture, for now, has the distinction of being one of the most disappointing dungeon crawlers that I played. Because I cannot even repurpose those components for miniature gaming. At least I can do that with Dark World. But yes, beautiful components with mechanics that feel like incredibly bland. That doesn't really work at all. The game seems to be really aimed at the young players, young gamers that do not want to learn complex games or not into complex tactics. It is a game that is a little bit insulting in a sense in the conception, because it really seems to be meant to dazzle you, to astound you, and that you will be happy just playing around with those toys without realizing that the mechanics are so lacking. And even teenagers at the time, I think, probably could tell if they were meant to be gamers, serious gamers one day. This being said, the game Dark World did have some expansions back in the day, so it wasn't a complete failure. So it achieved some of its goals, which was again to dazzle, to astound, to hypnotize. But it was not destined to become a classic. It was destined to become a curiosity, a little bit of a special guest in a freak show about games that just seem to go against nature, the nature of good game design / production. Games always being a technology that lives in the narrow band between design elements and components elements. That's why the designs do not exist abstractly. You need elements to bring them to life. And this game is a freak show because it's part of a freak show because you have these extremely thin blend mechanics covered by this enormous completely unnecessary set of components. It's historically interesting. This is something I say very often, and it seems like I'm doing this to somehow apologize for all games that did not stand the test of time. But it's true. I find the lacking games from back then interesting when I think about the reasons why these mediocre games existed, were designed in the first place, and maybe did even have some success at the time. Early 90s, the board gaming industry is under siege from video games, and board game makers are trying to give players the thing that video games cannot do, which is the tactile experience, the sensorial experience. But unfortunately, there's nothing wrong with that. The mistake in doing that at the expense of interesting mechanics and interesting gameplay. This being said, probably the target here was in fact that of teenagers, maybe role-playing gamers, maybe not gamers at all, but they just would stop by and say, wow, look at that, that's amazing, look at that art and that enormous manticore, that seems interesting. Early 90s, video games were the thing, were super exciting, were super exotic, and we're very different from the thing that people would do every day. That is to say, we did not work on computers in the early 90s. Most people that had a computer used the computer mainly to play video games. That was the thing that other things could not replace. A lot of other things that today we do by computers at the time were still done in an analog way. That is, we had analog jobs, we had analog social lives, most of us. We were out there in the boring, dull, analog world made of things and real people, yeah. And then we came home and wow, there were video games that were so exotic, so different. Now we spend so much time staring at screens all day, and that includes you. Heck, you work and then you also watch video reviews. You work probably at a computer, and you also watch video reviews as part of your entertainment. Maybe you do the thing at the same time at work, and that's fine. So we spend so much time staring to screens that, of course, now we are more interested, and then we want to take a break. The exotic thing becomes being in a room with other people, manipulating real components with a tactile feel, with a beautiful aesthetics. Which is why these days we do have games with a beautiful presentation. Thinking of Imperial Assault, Descent, Game of Thrones, the board game, the Art of Game of Thrones, the card game, the D&D board games such as Legends of Druids and so on. Beautiful presentation, but also tied together with mechanics that match the elements. Because now the hobby gamers tend to be mature adult, to be more discriminating. Makers of games such as Imperial Assault or such as Descent or Game of Thrones, the board game, are not just trying to draw in unaware teenagers. They have a very specific understanding of the discriminating gamer of today, which is a gamer that stares into a screen all day, then goes home, enjoys a beautiful tactile, sensorial board game experience in the same room with other living people, but also has an understanding of game mechanics. So somebody who enjoys beautiful components, but also wants beautiful mechanics. That was quite a digression to say Dark World is interesting because it shows a time when game makers had not realized that. In the sense, they weren't completely wrong, because this category of the hobby gamer as we have nowadays wasn't quite there yet. We had the word gamers that were the most committed gamers of them all, but also sometimes they were still reluctant to join the fantasy world, to join the fantasy side of the hobby. So we did not have the hobby gamers with the same mentality, with the same availability of time, of income, with the same needs that we have nowadays. So Dark World is this strange creature from a freak show that shows very limited mechanics and huge material expenditure of energy, which is not something of all that much interest to play per se, but it is of interest as a predecessor to beautifully presented games of today, which have that beautiful presentation, but without the excesses of the Dark World, and with more of a conscience, more of an awareness of the mechanical aspect. So it's a failure. It's a game failure to me, but interesting one. It's a failure along the way towards a very complicated, very non-linear path that would lead to the creation of the board game hobby culture as we have today. Dark World, you planning to buy it? Feel free. If you do, probably you will use it for the components if you're a miniature gamer. Something that it could not be bad for could be to introduce like a very young gamer to board gaming. But even if I am to introduce my 5-year-old to board gaming or to role-playing games, style games, to immersive games, adventure games, probably this is not the best one, because the components are so prominent that they become distracting. So I think that games such as Wrath of Shadow would work better even as introductory games. Dark World I don't think is the best game even for that thing. Dark World, strange, interesting, outdated. It is what it is. Not that great, but it tells us about an interesting moment of identity crisis in the history of board gaming.